And sisters, we are ready for the daily Ramadan lecture. If any of you brothers and sisters are planning to stay for the lecture, I would request them to maintain the silence inside the masjid hall. And if you are leaving, please also maintain silence as you leave, and don't have a conversation in the courtroom, because that can easily be heard inside the hall. Recite the salawat. I would take one more opportunity to recognize the sponsors of tonight's program, which was sponsored by the families of Brother Mohsen Sheikh, Brother Kazim Raza, and Sister Yasmin Hussain, for increasing their tawfiqat, for their sihat and salamti. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi. For their marhumin, for the isal sawab of their marhumin, let us recite a Surah Fatiha with another loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hamdini ya na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. I would request brothers and sisters who are in the hall, we are ready for the lecture. If you can please maintain silence and sit down and be ready for the lecture. Just another quick reminder, please make sure your phones are on silent mode. And if you have kids, younger kids with you, please make sure they are sitting next to you. Recite another salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad. We've been really privileged to have Shayk Rizwan Arastu, who has been sharing his wisdom and his knowledge for since the beginning of the month, for his sihat salamti, for his family sihat salamti and increased tawfiqat. Let us really recite a very loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad. With that, I would now request Wajid Islam, Shayk Rizwan Arastu, to please come to the podium. Please recite another salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي Amma ba'd. As the last few sisters finish their conversations and leave, if they're leaving, please recite one more salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We have been engaged in this journey through one particular idea that the Quran talks about, which is nifaq, from the beginning of the month. And today will be the conclusion of this particular topic and my lectures. And inshallah, from tomorrow we'll be able to benefit from Shaykh Faizi. We have explored this concept and tried to understand how Allah talks about nifaq, hypocrisy, two-facedness. One of the goals that I think is probably what we've focused on more is what are those attributes of a munafiq that sometimes show up within ourselves. And we've been able to hopefully recognize them, at least as ideas, and then maybe also been able to recognize that we might have some vestiges of that, or inshallah we're free of those things. But in any case, it's a kind of an exercise in self-awareness and the self-purification as well. Some of the qualities that we looked at were laziness when it comes time to pray, the intention of ostentation, garnering praise from people when we do actions instead of looking only for Allah's praise, lying, saying one thing and meaning something else, saying something and believing something else. So all of those were some of the main attributes that these munafiqeen had. The ones that are mentioned historically had motives that were counter to the Prophet's motives. Alhamdulillah, within ourselves, we should never find those kinds of qualities at that level. But one of the takeaways from the discussion on nifaq is that it's a gradated type of a concept. And there's a spectrum of nifaq that we might find in the world. There's the Abdullah bin Salul and the Muawiyah and those kinds of people who are at one end of the spectrum where they're completely kafir inside, and not only innocently kafir, but kafir in a way that they want to undermine Islam and everything Islam stands for. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are also subtle forms of nifaq that we could, God forbid, find within ourselves. And we have to be that self-aware, that reflective of ourselves, that we find those things, we're critical of ourselves. We follow Allah's own advice to Musa alayhi salam when he says, "Ittahim nafsaka ala nafsik." Don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt. We're called on to give everyone else the benefit of the doubt, and that's one of the things we'll talk about today. But we're not supposed to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We're supposed to suspect ourselves, always be suspicious of ourselves. Ittahim nafsaka ala nafsik. So if there's a chance that your intention might be bad, there's a chance that you might have a wrong intention, a wrong idea, you might be doing something that's incorrect, then you should really be hard on yourself. And not in a way that you lose hope, but in a way that you're very critical, and then you take it seriously, you work on yourself, you seek Allah's help, you seek other people's help if they can help you. But don't give yourself an easy pass. Other people get easy passes, but not yourself. The last couple of days we talked about elements within our Islamic practice that seem to have a two-facedness about them that might resonate with nifaq, but actually there's sanction for them. We have taqiyya, we have sanctioned lying, certain instances where actually lying is the right thing to do because of some greater good that can be accomplished through that. So we looked at those in the last couple of days. Today what I want to do is address one last idea that I wanted to communicate. I think especially in the first couple of lectures, there is a general sense that this is something scary. Nifaq is something that, we should be on guard. Maybe it's creeping and lurking amongst us, and who knows if the person next to me is munafiq. And it seemed like something a little bit scary, and I want to move away from that position. That's not the kind of takeaway we should have where we suspect one another. Right? Yes, nifaq exists within ourselves. The elements are undoubtedly statistically going to exist in our community as well. But the result of these discussions should not be that we now suspect each other, that we now don't trust each other. All right, so I'm going to talk about a couple of different principles that we have in Islam that actually do the exact opposite. They ask us, with regard to our fellow believers, to have a very good opinion, to always have a positive outlook, to be optimistic when it comes to one another. Now that seems to be a conflicting message with the idea that there's a presence of nifaq. How can we also be so positive with regards to one another if that same nifaq could be in that fellow brother, that fellow mu'min, that fellow sister? How do I balance these two? So one of the solutions to that conundrum is we have to be nuanced in looking at what are the stakes in any given situation. Sometimes we are involved in a high stakes relationship with somebody. We're thinking of marriage, and there's a marriage proposal that comes from a particular family, and now marriage is a high stakes situation. Your child and this other person's child are now going to be married, and there's a huge level of vulnerability in that. You don't want to take that lightly and say, inshallah she's good, inshallah he's good, let's just go for it and let's assume the best and hope for the best. And we can't go with that kind of neglectfulness into a relationship as serious as marriage. That is a place where we are called on, we are justified, it's rational, religiously also justified to be very critical. Right? Investigate, do your due diligence, research the family, research the person, reputation, ask around. If there are red flags, then take those seriously, investigate them, and if the red flags keep coming up, then push that person away and say this is not the right match. There we're supposed to take it seriously and be suspicious, not in an unhealthy way where everyone's suspicious and we push everyone away, but we have to be do due diligence as parents, as elders who are advising our children in getting married. In business transactions, when money is at stake, when there's a possibility for the trampling of rights, right? So this is another place where we are called on to be very careful, not to just engage in a business transaction or in a partnership with somebody with the assumption that inshallah he's a good brother, inshallah she's a good sister, let's go for it, bismillah. But rather to do due diligence, to make sure what is the reputation of this person, how careful are they with their money, how in line are your goals and your attentiveness to Islamic guidelines and these kinds of things. I'll share one story with you. This is from the time of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. His oldest son was Ismail ibn Ja'far. And Ismail was a righteous person, loved by his father, of course, and we have very good records of his character. There's one story that tells of this interaction between Imam Sadiq and his son Ismail. We're told that Ismail had some money that he wanted to invest. It says a few dananir in the tradition, some gold pieces, and he wanted to invest. And so he comes to Imam Sadiq and he says, I have this money to invest. There is this person who is going off to do some business. I'd like to invest with him. What do you say? So the Imam says, you know his reputation. He drinks alcohol. The reputation is that he's a consumer of wine. And so Ismail, with a very positive outlook, says, people say that, but I should give him the benefit of the doubt. And this is a rumor. I shouldn't listen to these sorts of rumors. The Imam says that no, a person who drinks alcohol, this is a serious character flaw, and such a person shouldn't be trusted. He says, La taf'al. So Ismail, he goes against his father's advice and he says, no, I should give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't know personally that he drinks. I've never seen him. People say this, and I should have a positive outlook. That's a common attitude I think we also like to have. It sounds like a very positive attitude to have towards people, that we should give them the benefit of the doubt. And again, that is the case in most situations, but this is money. This is a trade transaction, and so we're not called on to be so generous. We're called on to be very exacting when it comes to who we're going to do these kinds of transactions with. So he gives him the money, and the guy goes off, and the money's gone. Yeah, it's lost. Either the person's lost, or he comes back and he says, I don't know what happened to it, it's lost. There's no accounting, and the investment is lost. That year, Ismail, along with his father, goes to Hajj. And when they go to Hajj, during their time there and their ibadah, Ismail starts to pray. And Imam Sadiq overhears his prayer. He says, Allahumma ajurni wa akhlif alayya. Reward me for this good opinion that I had of the person, the optimism I had of a fellow believer, and replace that money that I've lost. I thought it was doing something good, and I invested with him despite the warnings. So replace that money in some other way out of your grace. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam overhears his son's dua, and he comes and he scolds him. He actually either pinches him or does something to actually physically also discipline him. فَهَمَزَهُ بِيَدِهِ مِنْ خَلْفِهِ, from the back. فَقَالَ لَهُ مَهْ يَا بُنَيَّ. Be quiet. He scolds him and says, that's a useless prayer. Why are you praying like this? What kind of a dua is this? He says, فَلَا وَاللَّهِ مَا لَكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ حُجَّةٌ وَلَا لَكَ أَن يَأْجُرَكَ وَلَا أَن يُخْلِفَ عَلَيْكَ. He says, you have no valid argument against God that you can now make a claim that you should receive this money back. You have no claim for any reward for what you did, and you have no right to expect that Allah will replace the money that you lost. وَقَدْ بَلَغَكَ أَنَّهُ يَشْرَبُ الْخَمْرِ. The news reached you that he is one who consumes wine. If you invested despite that kind of a warning sign, you have no right to come to Allah and say, oh Allah, replace that money for me because I did something that I thought was good and this and that. You have no claim whatsoever. He scolds Ismail. So Ismail responds to the Imam. He says, "Inni lam arahu yashtabul khamr. Innama sami'tu an-nas yaqulun." I didn't see him with my own eyes drinking alcohol. I only heard people say this. It was a rumor. And so I thought it's better to ignore such a rumor and give the benefit of the doubt and go with the investment. The Imam responds, "Ya bunayya inna Allah azza wa jalla yaqul fi kitabihi yu'minu billahi wa yu'minu lil mu'mineen. Yusaddiqu Allah wa yusaddiqu al mu'mineen." Allah praises, He says that one of the qualities of the Prophet, and now He's saying this is a virtue of every believer, is that whatever Allah tells you, you believe, and whatever the believers tell you, also believe. You give the benefit of the doubt to the believers. By giving the benefit to this one who was accused of drinking alcohol, you insulted all the believers who had seen him or were reporting this to you. You didn't believe them when they were telling you this. You should have given preference to that kind of red flag and believed the believers. فَإِذَا شَهِدَ عِنْدَكَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ فَصَدِّقْهُمْ. There's a beep. Can we make sure the phones are off, please? So when believers come and testify before you, even if it's in the form of rumors, then believe them. Don't go against all of those testimonies, otherwise you're insulting them and their credibility by not accepting the information that they're giving you. وَلَا تَأْتَ مِنْ شَارِبَ الْخَمْرِ فإن الله عز وجل يقول في كتابه ولا تؤتوا السفهاء أموالكم التي جعل الله لكم قياما. He says, never trust a consumer of alcohol, of wine, with anything. He doesn't deserve your trust. Allah has said, don't give your money to fools. لا تؤتوا السفهاء أموالكم. Don't give your money to fools. In the context of the verse, it's talking about young children who don't yet have they're not yet baligh, they don't have the wisdom to be able to manage money, so don't give your money to them. But he says that, who is فَأَيُّ سَفِيهٍ أَسْفَهُ مِنْ شَارِبِ الْخَمْرِ. What fool is there who's more foolish than a person who drinks wine? He's much more foolish than that child. He should have the intellect to avoid this, and he gives up his intellect voluntarily by drinking. What kind of a fool is this? إِنَّ شَارِبَ الْخَمْرِ لَا يُزَوَّجُ إِذَا خَطَبَ. He says a person who is accused of drinking alcohol should not be married to, his proposal must not be accepted if he proposes. وَلَا يُشَفَّعُ إِذَا شَفَعَ. If he wants to intervene on your behalf and intercede on your behalf in something, don't accept his intercession. وَلَا يُؤْتَمَنُ عَلَى أَمَانَةٍ. He should never be trusted with any sort of trust. فَمَنِ ائْتَمَنُهُ عَلَى أَمَانَةٍ فَاسْتَهْلَكَهَا لَمْ يَكُنْ لِلَّذِي ائْتَمَنَهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ أَنْ يَأْجُرَهُ وَلَا يُخْلِفَ عَلَيْهِ. So if any Muslim trusts a person who drinks alcohol with any amana, and then he destroys it, he loses it, then this person who trusted him against all indications has no claim against Allah for any reward, nor for any replacement in the dunya. So this gives us a sense of, well, it's a little bit, it seems severe, I think, to us. We seem, I think our culture seems to say that what Ismail did seems very honorable, giving the benefit of the doubt, assuming the best, ignoring rumors, all of that seems to be the right thing to do. But the Imam is saying, no, the stakes are too high here. On the one hand, it's your money, and you have to be very careful with how you invest your money, how you spend your money, who you trust it to. And on the other hand, you have something like, someone who consumes alcohol. Right? That maybe we have even worse things than that now, with drugs and drug addictions and other things like that. So the red flag should have been very glaring for you, and the stakes were also very high. This is not a place where you should give the benefit of the doubt. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, on the other side of the coin, this is a place where you are encouraged to have that suspicion and act on that suspicion. But in many cases and many places where the stakes are low, when it's just a matter of our daily commerce with one another, there's not an issue of marriage, not an issue of life, an issue of money, of these important things where trust is very important, just the mundane things of life. Here, we're encouraged actually to have that positive outlook. Give the benefit of the doubt. So I'll share a couple of we have in Islamic law these things called qawa'id fiqhiyya, the legal maxims. These are principles that span different discussions of fiqh. And if you have a handle on these legal principles, these legal maxims, it's very helpful because then you can start to make sense of how the law works. And sometimes you can even anticipate what the fatwa will be based on these principles. And then you can check with the mujtahid and see, but if you have the principles right, if you've applied it right, then it should align with the fatwa of your mujtahid. But it gives you an insight into how Islamic law works. And these are accessible principles. These are in ahadith for the most part, that the imams have taught these principles, and then our scholars over the years have worked on them, developed them more, and then they work their way into our fiqh. One of these principles is, in Arabic, it's called asalatu sihhat al-muslim fi af'alihi. So the principle is that I'll split it into two parts. When you do something, I should assume that whatever you're doing is at least permissible. Right, so if you're doing something, say you're speaking badly about somebody, right? So I overhear that for instance, you're talking to another brother, and you're saying that such and such young man has some really bad qualities. I shouldn't jump to the conclusion that this is ghiba, or at least that it's haram ghiba, because there are instances where ghiba is also halal. If there's a chance, I should assume that probably you're talking about, maybe it's a marriage proposal that you're talking about. And this boy is one part of that, he's the one who's offering the proposal, and you're informing the father or whoever, someone who's involved in the interaction, that this person is not worthy. He has some bad qualities, you should be careful about this young man, for instance, because I've seen this or I've heard this, and I don't think he's a very good candidate for your daughter. If that's a possibility in what I'm observing, I should assume that's the case. That whatever you're doing, it is most likely a halal activity, even if it's something like ghiba. I should not participate, because even in halal ghiba, you do damage control. It's just you're trying to save somebody from a bad marriage, but you only inform the minimum people that are necessary to dissuade them from the marriage if you think that's what's in the best interest of the family. It's not public all knowledge. Let me announce to everyone, for instance, that this person is a bad candidate. No, to the one person who's now entertaining the proposal, I should let that father, that mother know that I have some concerns about this particular boy who's come to propose. Or vice versa, or the girl. So that is one of our principles, that I should assume that whatever you're doing is right. We had an example of this in one of the ahadith I shared with you a few days ago. It was the story of that person the Robin Hood, who thought he was winning in the reward and not getting punished for the punishment, because he had misunderstood إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. And Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was wandering around Kufa. Salawat. The hadith told us that Imam Sadiq was looking at this person, kind of following him, and he saw him take the 2 pieces of bread, take the 2 pomegranates. And what was Imam Sadiq's response, or his thought when he saw that? He said, لَعَلَّهُ مُعَامَلَةً. Even though it could possibly be that he was stealing, but he said perhaps the person has some sort of actual legal transaction with that person. Maybe he had already paid for it the day before, and now he's just picking up the goods that he had paid for already. Maybe he has an outstanding credit with that vendor, and he's just picking up his goods. Right? So he gave that possibility, and with that he left it alone. He didn't investigate, he didn't go and say anything or do anything. He gave the benefit of the doubt to that person. All right, so that's one aspect of this asalatu sihha fi fi'l al-Muslim. A couple of verses that we have about this. One is the verse from Surah Al-Hujurat, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ijtanibu kathira min adh-dhann inna ba'da adh-dhanni ithm. We're told to avoid many suspicions, because some suspicions are sinful. The many and some are a little bit strange here. He says avoid the majority of suspicions. Yes, some suspicions where the red flags are very big, like we saw, or the stakes are very high, those suspicions are valid. You should have them, you should entertain them, you should investigate, do your due diligence, all of that's in its right place. That kind of suspicion about the sharib al-khamr, the one who drinks wine, is in its place. That's not what Allah is saying, ijtanibu kathira min adh-dhann. That's the right kind of suspicion to have. But the vast majority of our suspicions of one another are baseless and should be avoided. But then he says some of those many, so say the majority, 85% of our suspicions should be avoided. Why? Because 25% are sinful. So what our commentators understand from this, the way the verse is, avoid most because some are bad, is that this is a place where you should be very cautionary in how you suspect people. You should give it a wide berth. So, suspicions very easily creep into our minds. You can easily, look around and you see someone doing something, see someone dressed some way. You can easily come up with a bad story. Oh, this person must be bad for this reason. He must have had this bad intention when he said this to me or did this to me. You can easily get out of control in your suspicions of other people. That's what he's trying to extinguish in our minds. Don't let yourself get into that. Don't have those suspicions of your fellow brothers and sisters in Iman. Some of those are actually sinful, but you should avoid all of those. And there's only a small subset of those suspicions that are valid, that you have a right to have, and that you should act on and investigate. And again, those are where the red flags are very big and where the stakes are very high. Another hadith that we have from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. He says, ضع أمر أخيك على أحسنه حتى يأتيك ما يغلبك منه. He says, whenever you see someone doing something, assume the best. Right? If I see you doing something and I don't know if you're doing something good, doing something bad, I should assume the best. Let me interpret it in the best way in my own mind. Until, this is not, kind of willful, it is a kind of willful ignorance to a level. But we're not told to be so blind that, I see the same thing every day, I see it repeated, I see, warning signs after warning signs, that I still assume that, no, inshallah, everything's good. Once the data is enough, then yes, now I'm convinced that there's something wrong here. I should step in, try to guide the person, try to remind him, do something to do nahi anil munkar, because there's some munkar happening here, I'm pretty sure. But to the extent that you can, especially in the early stages of that evidence, then interpret it in the best way. Then inshallah, whatever he's doing is right. Probably this is what he meant. Probably he had this good intention. Probably he had this excuse for whatever he did. And come up with those kinds of excuses for the person. So da' amra akhika ala ahsani. Interpret whatever your brother or sister does in faith in the best way. Hatta ya'tiyaka ma yaghlibuka minhu. Until so much evidence comes to you, or such conclusive evidence comes to you, that no, actually what he's doing is definitely wrong, and I need to intervene. وَلَا تَظُنَّنَّ بِكَلِمَةٍ خَرَجَتْ مِنْ أَخِيكَ سُوءًا. When a sentence comes out of your brother's or sister's mouth, don't interpret it in the bad way. Don't assume that it has a bad meaning, there was a bad intention behind it. Don't have su'ul dhann. Don't be pessimistic about the things that your brothers and sisters say. وَأَنْتَ تَجِدُ لَهَا فِي الْخَيْرِ مَحْمِلًا. As long as you can find a credible, plausible interpretation for it that's good, then don't assume that it's bad. So to the extent, we have to make an effort to try to interpret one another's actions in the best possible way until it's no longer sensible to do so. All right. Recite wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Another related rule that we have. This is also called asalatul sihha, but it has to do with whether or not someone's actions are correct. So just now we were talking about whether it's legal or not. So I should assume that whatever you all are doing is legal. There must be some mubah reason for why you did this, and so there's some justification. It's legal, whatever you've done. So I don't need to intervene and do nahi anil munkar or amr bil ma'ruf, because inshallah what you're doing is right. Until it becomes clear for me that no, there's some problem here and I should try to intervene to improve the situation. Another related thing is, I should assume that whatever you do is correct. And what this means is that sometimes what you do may have some ramifications. There may be some practical implications that come out of it that might also affect me. So for instance, if you have a cell phone in front of you and you're using it, you're calling, your contacts are on there, I should assume that you own this. And that you bought it correctly, with your own money. It's not a stolen item. I shouldn't assume that it's stolen. I should rather assume that you bought it and it's fully yours. If you are married to your spouse, I should assume that the marriage was correct and that you're actually legally married. I shouldn't suspect that. No, probably. I really doubt that they said the sigha right. I doubt that the person really, said it with, in the right sigha and pronounced it correctly. I shouldn't suspect. I should assume that whatever nikah was done between you and your spouse, I wasn't present, I don't know. I should assume that it's all correct. You're legally married, your children are your legitimate children. Those are all assumptions that we should make about one another, that everything you've done is correct. One practical example, this comes into najasa and tahara. So we have a principle in our rules for tahara. One of the ways to know that something that was najis or mutanajis has become tahir is that it's in the control of a believer and there's been some sort of a barrier. I left the room and I didn't see what happened, and now I come back and there's enough time for them to purify it. I should assume that it's tahir. A more practical example. So say I see you have some blood on your, not blood's obvious, but let's say you're holding a baby and now there's some najasa on you because the baby's diaper was leaking, for instance. I see that. And now we go for dinner and we come back, your clothes are dry. I should assume that you've purified your clothes. I don't need to ask you. Even if you lend me those clothes and I'm going to pray in them, I should assume that it's tahir and it's fine for me to pray in them. Why? Just because there was time enough for you to purify it, I should assume that you did so. I'm perfectly justified in it. And in fact, if I suspect you or if I double check and ask you, then I'm doing something wrong. Right? So ghayabul Muslim is one of the mutahharat, one of the things that purifies something, is just the fact that it was in the possession of a Muslim, and now I've left, the lights went out for 10 minutes and now they came back on, and there was enough time for you to go and purify it and all of this, I should assume it's purified. It might seem a little bit, maybe like willful ignorance, but this is actually what we're called on to do. And one of the reasons is that one of the priorities Allah wants us to have is this spirit of trust. He doesn't want us to be suspicious of one another. And can you imagine if very likely, in all of our houses, if we had kids especially, at some point najasa has gotten on something. Whether it's the bathroom, a carpet, on the floor, the bathroom counter, at some point, it's very difficult to live a life without having some najasa go somewhere, when you have children especially. If that's the rule that we go with, and every time I come to your house, I say, I'm not going to touch anything. I don't know about whether the bathroom's clean, I don't know where this carpet's clean, I'm not going to pray here, I'm not going to pray there, I'm not going to touch this. And I ask you, are you sure you purified everything? And what kind of a interaction would that be between us? You would be offended. Do you think I'm so lax with my attention to Islamic law? Why are you suspecting? Why are you not trusting me? It would lead to very bad relations if we had that kind of attitude. He wants us to be careful about tahara and najasa, but it's a lesser priority than the bonds between the believers. And we shouldn't erode those bonds for the sake of something like tahara and najasa. Rather, we have to assume that everything's tahir until we know it's najis. Again, assume that even if it was najis, even if I saw it najis last week, I should assume that by now it's been purified next time I come over. And I shouldn't ask. I need not ask. I may pray on that same carpet that had najasa last week, assuming that it's tahir this week without asking. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi. Another principle, another legal maxim is called qa'idatul yad. Qa'idatul yad literally means the rule of the hand. But what it means is that whatever a Muslim has in his or her possession, we should assume that they have ownership or they have the right to have that. So like the previous example, your cell phone that's in front of you that has your contacts on it, that's in your pocket, I should assume that it's yours. I shouldn't suspect and say, no, probably he stole it. Probably it's not his, it must be somebody else's. And no, the default is that it's yours. The house that you live in, that you have the keys to, that your garage door opens, that the garage in that house, I should assume that's your house. I shouldn't say that, no, he's a squatter. Right? So it's a simple principle, a very commonsensical principle as well. It wasn't commonsensical enough for people to avoid taking fadak. Right? That was the principle. That was the main principle that Lady Fatima comes with for fadak. This was mine. My agents are there. I've been managing this for the last few years. It's mine. And now you come and you kick out my agents and put your own agents in there and say, if it's yours, you prove it. It's not my job to prove that what's mine is mine. It's your job to disprove it and bring evidence that's conclusive that proves that it's not mine. If you claim that the cell phone is not mine, you better come and prove it. I don't have to prove that it's mine. All clues, the fact that it's in my possession, there are no other claims on it, all the contacts are mine, I have the receipt for buying it, whatever it is, all that points to the fact that it's mine. If you want to disprove that, then you have to come with evidence to undermine that certainty that I have. So anyway, that's a principle we have, and it was the first one of the first acts of aggression against the Ahlul Bayt, to go against this particular principle. One more principle, there are a few related here. Qa'idatu suq al-muslimin. This is a very relevant one and one that people often have doubts about. So we have a principle, one of them, there's kind of three levels to it. One is a principle that says that whatever a Muslim sells you, assume that it's halal and tahir and good. Whatever you buy from a marketplace that is dominantly Muslim, also same assumptions. Whatever you buy from a country that is dominated by Muslims, also assume the same things. Right? So for instance, you go into a grocery store, butcher, or restaurant that's owned by a Muslim. If it's owned by a Muslim, you should go in there and you should assume that everything is mudakka, everything's tahir, everything's halal, and you can buy it. You shouldn't go and ask that Muslim owner, is it really halal? Is it really mudakka? Is this really beef or is it pork? Again, asking those questions, suspecting, researching, creates that atmosphere of suspicion. And that is to be avoided. This is not us kind of undermining Islam. The Islamic guidelines say this. Right? I'll share a couple of hadith with you. The first one from I believe it's our fifth Imam or sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq or Imam Baqir alayhi salam. From Zurara and Muhammad ibn Muslim, أنهم سألوا أبا جعفر, from Imam Baqir alayhi salam, عن شراء اللحوم من الأسواق ولا يدرى ما صنع القصابون. They ask him about buying meat from the market when I don't know what the butchers did. I wasn't there at the abattoir to see whether it was a Muslim who killed it was facing the Qibla and this and that. If they cut all four of the tubes, I don't know if all those things happened. Now I go to the butcher shop and there's meat hanging there. Now what can I do? Can I buy it or not buy it when I don't know how it was slaughtered? The Imam says, كل إذا كان ذلك في سوق المسلمين ولا تسأل عنه. If it's a marketplace of Muslims, or the store itself is owned by a Muslim, then eat of that meat and don't ask about it. وَلَا تَسْأَلْ عَنْهُ. Don't ask. And in some of the hadith they say, because if we start to ask one another and do research, then there'll be such suspicion that no Muslim will eat from another Muslim's meat. And the same excuse is there, you come over to my house, how do you know that the meat I'm giving you is halal? You didn't see me slaughter it. You didn't see what store I bought it from. If you come and you ask me, is the meat mudakka? Is the meat halal? Can you show me the receipt where you bought it from? What kind of interactions will we have after that? It'll ruin our Muslim relationships. And that camaraderie, that mutual trust, that communal atmosphere, especially around food. Food is so important for Islamic culture. We're supposed to, we're never supposed to eat alone. It's makruh to eat alone. And you're supposed to, always have someone there, either family, friends, have someone sit with you when you're eating. So you got to have that trust as the basis for that you can just come and you can enjoy whatever food a Muslim serves you, sells you, gives you. Just eat it, say Bismillah, and it's good to go. With full trust that it's halal. One more tradition, also on the same topic. He says, "La ba'sa bis-salat." I'll skip that part. وَلَا بَأْسَ فِي مَا صُنِعَ فِي أَرْضِ الْإِسْلَامِ. There's no problem praying in leather goods, for instance, that were produced in a Muslim land. Muslim country, Muslim suburb, Muslim neighborhood, whatever it might be, if it's from a place that's dominated by Muslims. So the person says, فَإِنْ كَانَ فِيهَا غَيْرُ أَهْلِ الْإِسْلَامِ. The person asks, what about, if it's not 100% Muslims, what if it's, only 90% Muslims, 80% Muslims? There are some kuffar that maybe this particular leather is from one of those, a Christian butcher killed it. The Imam says, إِذَا كَانَ الْغَالِبُ عَلَيْهَا الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَلَا بَأْسَ. If the dominant population there is Muslim, then no problem, go for it. Yeah, so we don't have to be suspicious and say, it's from China, who knows if it's killed by a Muslim or not. There are Uyghurs there, there are Muslims there, and apparently they're the ones who are mainly in charge of, or at least there's a chance that they're the ones who are in charge of butchering. So if that's the case, that possibility is there, that's good enough. All right. Recite with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the idea behind sharing all of these, again, is to give us a sense that this dominant spirit is there in our Islamic teachings. Especially from the Ahlul Bayt, they've taught us that this brotherhood that's there, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, that's really important. That trust, that feeling of camaraderie, all of that's very important. And these ideas of tahara and najasa, of whether or not meat is halal or not, that is secondary. That is important in its own place, but it's secondary, or even further down the totem pole, from these really important principles of that social cohesiveness that we want to have in our society. And this goes against that idea of being suspicious of one another. It's just the opposite. We're supposed to be trusting of one another, especially in these circumstances where the stakes are low. Right? Meat, low stakes. Right? Leather that you're wearing, low stakes. It's not like those other things, partnerships of business and marriage and your life and your safety, those kinds of things. Those are high stakes, and so you should be more careful. If there's reason to suspect, then do your best if you can. Give the person benefit of the doubt. But if the stakes are too high and the red flags are too big, then no, you should be suspicious and do due diligence before you entrust yourself and make yourself so vulnerable before someone who potentially is very corrupt. One last message I'll share with you. So we looked at historically how Rasulullah encountered nifaq in his time. It wasn't his policy to identify the munafiqeen. He wouldn't call them out and say, for instance, this person or these people are munafiqeen, because then it'd be burning the bridge of those people. You're basically saying they're kafir. And Rasulullah himself is saying that they're kafir, then they should be excluded from society. He seems to have gone out of his way to hide the identity of munafiqeen. I gave you the example of the background of Surah Al-Munafiqun and Banu Mustaliq, and how he didn't want anyone to, for instance, take any aggressive action against Abdullah ibn Ubay. Even though he had made that sort of pledge, La yukhrijanna al-a'azzu minha al-adhal. When we go back to Midian, we're going to kick these Muslims out once and for all. He was talking like that, but once he scolded him and all of this, and he made his pledges, even though they're false pledges, Allah says, innahum lakadhibun, they're liars in these pledges. Even then, he refuses to let anyone hurt him, touch him, kick him out, kill him. And the same with the munafiqun during the incident of Aqaba, I just mentioned a couple of times this assassination attempt on Rasulullah, where they had lined up on this little mountain pass as the Prophet was passing through, waiting to push his animal or scare his animal, spook it so it'd run down the hill, jump down the hill, and the Prophet would die by being thrown off the side of the mountain. And Rasulullah stops them. He sends Hudayfa ahead to kind of flush them out and get rid of the danger. So he doesn't go in naively. But he knows who they are. Hudayfa also either knows, he sees them, or Rasulullah tells him. So he knows who they are, but then he tells Hudayfa, we're not to share the names with anyone. We're not to tell anyone who these people were. And even in the traditions that have come to us, we don't know the actual names of the people who were guilty of this assassination attempt on Rasulullah in the aftermath of Tabuk as they were returning. So this seems to be his common policy, not to identify them. There's no war that Rasulullah engages in with the munafiqeen. There's no expelling of these people. There is Masjid al-Dirar is one instance where he does take a stand. Masjid al-Dirar is a masjid that was built in rivalry with Masjid Quba. The people who, a neighboring clan became jealous of the piety and the praise that the people in Masjid Quba were receiving, and the fact that Rasulullah prayed and repeatedly prayed with them. And so they built another mosque close by, and this became like a headquarters for the munafiqeen. They would meet there, they would make their plots and plans and all of the stuff there. And so this was one instance where Rasulullah puts his foot down. It's mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah as well. And he, according to the seerah, he orders that the masjid be burnt down. He destroys that mosque because it's the headquarters. So the lesson that we should also take away is that even though nifaq exists, and this is a quality of Muslims, it's not way out there, it's amongst us, within ourselves. This is like so many other vices that we have. We are not called on to oust people, to shun people, to remove people from our institutions or from our households and these kinds of things because of these different vices. Yes, some vices are worse than others. Sharab al-khamr, for instance, someone who drinks, who addicted to drugs and these kinds of things. So there are certain ways that we're supposed to shun them, to put pressure on them, give them the cold shoulder, avoid saying salam to them, avoid marrying, avoid transactions with them, give them the cold shoulder, show them that it's going to hurt. If you're going to be like this, then we're going to avoid interactions with you. So there's some places like that where we take a stand, or we're supposed to take a stand against certain sins. But the kind of mid-range sins and the lower sins, in terms of their severity, we're not supposed to act like that. Just because I commit a sin, that doesn't mean that you kick me out. That all it means is that if it's a repeated offense, if it's something that I don't know about or I know about and I keep on repeating, then some of you have the duty to come to me and say, this is a sin, right? This is wrong. You shouldn't be doing it. How can we help you, remind you, get you back on track? That's your duty. That's our duty to one another, is to get each other back on track. And nifaq is the same. Those lower levels of nifaq that might be there that are not so destructive that it's going to tear our community apart. But there's some bad ideas, there's some wrong ideas people are passing around. There's some literature they're passing around that might be a little bit destructive or whatever. If it's manageable, then it's the duty of whoever's in charge, whoever's managing, to manage those things. Mitigate the harm. Go talk to that person and say, whatever ideas you have, that's your own business, but don't pass out literature here. Right? If you can just hold your tongue and not talk about these wrong ideas, this is not the place for it. If you want to have the ideas, talk about it outside, that's your own business, but not in ours. Don't break up our institutions or break up our community. So it has to be managed, but the person is not shunned. The person is not ousted. Unless, of course, the problem gets so bad that it is actually destructive. There is now a fitna in the community, there's division, there's those kinds of things. Then again, leadership would have to step in and decide what to do about those kinds of extreme cases. But the point is that nifaq exists. We have to constantly be on guard, just like every other vice. Within ourselves, if it's creeping in, I need to be on guard and get rid of it. If it's in my brothers and sisters, I need to do whatever I can to enjoin good and forbid evil and help them get back on track. That should be the attitude that we have amongst ourselves to try to deal with these different kinds of vices that creep in. And it's a lifelong struggle. Again, the Prophet never took that kind of hard stand to eradicate nifaq. That's not possible. It's about managing it. It's about minimizing it, mitigating the harms, containing it, keeping lines of communication and bridges, intact so that people can return. We have, again, in the Quran, instances where people were munafiq and then they repented, they came back to faith. Right? And so that's the ultimate goal. It is a little bit late. It's the last lecture, though. I'll entertain any questions if there are any clarifications from today's lecture, and then we'll close, inshallah. Yeah, so it's not about buying and selling transactions. That's kind of you can minimize the harm quite a bit with that. This is about partnerships where you're now entrusting. Yeah, so with partnerships, alcohol is one of those things that we really need to. You don't want to have any sort of connection with alcohol, and then you can extend that to drugs as well. But the alcohol, it is so pervasive, and it's something that Islam really takes a hard stand on. You don't want to be at all part of the production chain of alcohol. And even if it's like it's a social part of business, like it is in many industries apparently, you have to stay away from that as much as you can. So yeah, if you're talking about partners who drink, then that's not the kind of person you should be with. Don't enter into a partnership. How can you trust them if they're like this? If they're willingly numbing their intellect, then who knows what they'll do in their drunken stupor. And that's exactly what Imam Sadiq is saying. Don't enter into partnerships. Don't make yourself vulnerable with people who are like this. Find Muslims. Go it alone or find Muslims, but don't enter into partnerships with such people. Yeah. So the partnership, it's not a legal issue. Entering into this partnership, this was not something haram that, you could say it was foolish. So maybe in that way you could say it was haram. But the transaction itself is not a haram transaction. The positions against the drunkard are ethical, and they're like so it doesn't make the transaction invalid, for instance. So yes, if you can shore up the contract and kind of fix things and make sure that things are going to, you have enough safety and you have enough, insurance that things won't go wrong, then you can make a legal case that this is okay then. That would be one way to fix it. But that's not the kind of person you want to be involved with, especially at that kind of level where it's a slippery slope. Once you start engaging with people who are into haram, then you end up having to kind of justify and say, okay, well, maybe this is okay, maybe this level is okay, and you lose your principles very quickly.
Regarding your story with the Prophet, the stakes seem pretty high, in regards to killing him. So, what?
With Abdullah ibn Ubay.
Yeah. Well, no. When they were saying that they were pushing him off the cliff, and he didn't reveal the munafiqun, or he really didn't do much.
Yeah.
Why do you think so? Because the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah, that's true. You're saying in this instant of Aqaba, the stakes are high. Why did the Prophet not take harsher measures against them. Yeah, so this is something we can only try to interpret what the Prophet's done. So the action seems historically very well attested. It fits into this pattern. He's protected through ghaibi mechanisms. Gabriel tells him what's happening, and he's able to stave off the harm through that mechanism. Whatever the wisdom was, whatever the interest was, it wasn't. He didn't see that it was in the best interest of the believers to step in. But with Abdullah ibn Ubay, his attitude was, I don't want people to talk and say that once Muhammad is victorious, that he kills his companions. So now, we've been victorious in Tabuk, meaning we've done what we had to do, and now I'm going to execute people for my own army. He doesn't want that kind of image out there for people to use and misinterpret. So that might be part of his reasoning. So there are things like that we can try to make sense of what the Prophet's doing. But what we have is the fact that he didn't expose them and make them notorious. All right. Let's stop. Let's finish up with the dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Help us, Allah, to struggle with these Quranic concepts and to become closer and closer to Quran. Help us to act on whatever knowledge we gain. Help us to follow in the footsteps of Ahlul Bayt. Reward us for all of our efforts to come closer to you in the month of Ramadan. Accept whatever deeds we've offered and help us to do more in the last couple of weeks before the month ends. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته